For the City Council of Highland Park, July 15, 2024. Will the clerk call the roll?
Councilmember Bruckman. Aye. Councilmember Ross.
Present.
Councilmember Tapio.
I'm sorry, present.
Let's start over again. You're here.
You're here.
And your name is Tapia.
I didn't see her. Start over, please.
Councilmember Bruckman. Here. Councilmember Ross.
Present.
Councilmember Tapio.
Present.
Councilmember Littleworth.
Here.
Councilmember Stone.
Here.
Councilmember Bloomberg.
Here.
Mayor Rotary.
Here, we have a quorum, and I'll just share, we have one council member who is sick and one council member dealing with a family matter. We do need to establish that they are who they are.
Correct.
Yumi, what are your children's names?
Cameron and Ian.
All right, and Kim, I don't know what to ask you. Do we love sustainability?
Your child named Rick.
What?
It's a live stream in there.
Okay. All right, we've established that it is Councilmember Stone and Councilmember Ross. Thank you both for joining us. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of the regular meeting of the Committee of the Whole held May 28th, 2024?
So moved. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 And the minutes are approved. Thanks. We have one item on our scheduled business tonight, and I just want to thank all of you for taking time out of your days to join us. Before we get started on our policy discussion regarding enhancing the safety and security of our community, I want to acknowledge that the vitriol and the stories that we all have been hearing are painful, and we appreciate everyone's patience waiting until today to have this conversation. As we navigate through these challenging times, it's important to recognize the impact that these narratives have had on each of us around this table, our staff, but most importantly, our community. I also want to share some personal background. I don't usually do this, but I believe it's of relevance to the community and to our discussion today. 6 of the 7 city council members are Jewish. You may not know that. 7 members, 6 of us are Jewish. Individually and collectively, we deeply feel the pain, the hurt, the fear, the anger that comes with generational trauma, each with our stories of our own families and the Holocaust and pogroms and anti-Semitism. One of us is the child of a Holocaust survivor and an Israeli. The 7th member, though not Jewish, has lived in this community for over 20 years and grew up in another country under a military dictatorship with the constant threat of domestic terrorism through an organization called the Shining Path. Our corporation counsel, who's been guiding us, is also Jewish. Our city manager fled her native country with her family as a child during a civil war, her own home having been bombed. She wears a necklace given to her by her mother containing a piece of shrapnel from that bomb, but in support of the Jewish people, she has been wearing an Israel bracelet on her wrist since October 7th. When he was a 7-year-old boy, our police chief's father, also a police officer, was taken hostage. He was beaten and shot in the head point blank and spent months in a coma, bearing the impacts of that violence for the rest of his life. And our chief lost his father when he was 16 years old. Now, I just want to say that if there was a group that has felt pain, that understands pain, we each understand the fear of being intimidated, either because of who we are or because of extreme external circumstances under our control. I don't say that to be defensive. I just say that to give you that foundation for this conversation, because what I'm hearing from so many people is you don't get it. But so many of us actually not only get it, we feel it, we're feeling it viscerally. And I wanted to make sure that everybody has this background and that it's in our public record. We each, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, want to do whatever we can to mitigate any threats, any intimidation. And so today we're here to discuss policies aimed at enhancing the safety and security of this, our community. Given our personal experiences with trauma and violence, it's essential, and I beg of all of us, to have this conversation with empathy and a deep understanding of the impact that these issues have on individuals and families. Our diverse backgrounds and shared experiences of overcoming adversity make us qualified, I feel, to address these concerns. And so now, to that end, we'll embark on a policy conversation regarding how we can make sure that efforts to intimidate and threaten our community are halted as quickly and as expediently as possible within the purview of the law. We will discuss what additional options may be available to us in the form of new laws, keeping in mind our ability to enforce them. It's crucial to balance our policymaking within the realities of this and the constitutional rights that govern actions, whether we agree with them or not. And so I say thank you to everybody around this table, to our chief, to our staff, and to each of you who've come to join us tonight in helping us find solutions that are effective, respectful, and work for our community. With that, I am turning it over to the chief or to you?
To me.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. Good evening, everybody. Just want to echo the mayor's appreciation for everyone for joining us for this important policy conversation this evening. Just procedurally, this is a committee of the whole meeting, so this is an opportunity for staff to present information to the mayor and city council, and we are looking for their policy feedback and direction on a number of issues that we're going to present this evening. We are in what is called the pre-session conference room. So there's a number of people that have joined us in this room. We have overflow seating in the council chambers where we have a live stream of this meeting. There's a slight delay because of technology, but the meeting is being live streamed next door. And then we have another overflow room in the lower level of City Hall. And then we've made arrangements with the library to also show the live stream of this meeting over at the library. This meeting is being recorded, and then for anyone who's not able to join us either physically or remotely, you can also watch the video of this meeting and download that from the city's website where that is available. The city council meeting is the public body meeting where there is business from the public, so that's where individuals will have an opportunity if you would like to address the mayor and city council. Consistent with our policy, we do ask anyone, if you're interested in presenting to the mayor and city council, that everyone's comments be limited to 3 minutes or less. And again, that is going to be at the city council meeting, which starts at 7:30. Working with the police chief, our corporation council, and certainly based on feedback from the public as well as the mayor and city council, we have put together this PowerPoint to guide the conversation for this evening. The chief, I'll turn it over to him in a moment. He's going to review the direct actions that took place in recent weeks. So one, the protest that took place in front of Congressman Schneider's home at approximately 3 a.m. on the 29th of June. And then we had two chalking events where we received a number of concerns from the public, and those took place on July 5th and July 10th. So he's going to give an overview of the city's response to those incidents. We will talk about some legal applicable laws that are available to us, and then also talk about next steps as well. We want to share with the public. We do a significant amount of public communication just to make sure the public feels informed about what the city's doing, as well as to invite your feedback, and so we're going to share that information. We are going to give a high-level overview of current local laws as well as state statutes that are available to us to address these incidents that our community faced. And then the policy, the heart of the policy conversation is there are additional considerations that could be advanced at a local level, and so we're seeking the mayor and council's feedback on those policy considerations. So that's included as part of the presentation. And then at the end, we can talk about next steps just to make sure that we are all aligned. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chief Jogman, who will review the incident.
Thank you, City Manager Newkirk. In light of the conversation we're going to be having tonight, it makes sense to just give an overview of the incidents that the City Manager spoke about momentarily ago. Just to provide some context and give some background so that we're all, thank you, operating from the same set of information. So I'll go through the first incident that occurred on the morning of June 29th in the 300 block of Woodland Road. So at 2:43, our dispatch received the first phone call for a noise complaint. There was some shouting in the 300 block of Woodland Avenue. There weren't a lot of details at that time because it was the first call. And then subsequently some more calls started coming in. Our first responding officer arrived at 2:47, so some 4 minutes later. and observed 30 to 40 protesters utilizing loudspeakers, banging drums, and holding banners in the roadway. A number of residents had also exited their homes and began interacting with the protesters. Supervisors self-dispatched, so our sergeants, and upon arrival at about 2:57, directed officers to set up a perimeter, which is what we do standardly, and then immediately seeing that it was a kind of a, again, 40 people versus our ultimately 8 officers, so a 5-to-1 ratio, requested mutual aid from neighboring departments. So for us, the first priority certainly is the safety of all involved and to prevent the incident from escalating into physical violence. So protocol being used for these type of events across a nation really calls for one point person from the police department to work or interact with a point person from the protesters. And so to that end, supervisors began speaking with a representative from the group at about 3:02. And really that was intended to determine their intentions, to advise them that their actions were unlawful and that they needed to disperse. Upon speaking with the group organizer, they agreed to work to begin dispersing, stating that it may take some time, maybe until 3:15. So supervisors advised them to stop using the loudspeakers and drums as the word was being spread to disperse. Although the organizer made an attempt to quiet the crowd, they didn't listen and they continued making noise. And they continued their unlawful activity.
Chief, there's overflow seating in the next room with live stream. So if you guys want to sit versus moving more people in here, I'm so sorry.
No,
Chief.
no worries.
Do you guys want to, all right, thank you. Go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, it's okay. I'll back it up a second. So again, the organizer did say that she would attempt to quiet the crowd, and she did make an attempt, but they did not listen, and they continued their unlawful activity. A number of residents were speaking with the supervisor and asked, and the supervisor told them that the officers, they were requesting their arrest be made. The supervisor advised them that at the given time, there were 8 officers on scene and approximately 40 protesters. So he related that they were waiting for additional officers to arrive from neighboring jurisdictions. The group did begin leaving the immediate area at about 3:18. They continued making noise as they dispersed. They continued their unlawful activity as they walked through the neighborhood. The first responding mutual aid officers began arriving at about 3:22. At approximately 3:30, the group began leaving the area in their vehicles. So that's kind of just a timeline to kind of illustrate what happened and kind of the brief actions that were taken. We've certainly heard the concerns of the community, and we've worked really hard to share the important and relevant information with respect to the response. We've been meeting with people one-on-one, with groups, trying to just share and give context to the response. So first, it's important to note that our community, Highland Park, the Highland Park Police Department, supports and works from a framework that was established by the Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police and the NAACP in a partnership. And one of the major tenets, principle number 10, highlights the priorities that officers really should be working from. And that is that we believe de-escalating training should be required to ensure the safety of community members and officers. We endorse de-escalation tactics to reduce the potential for confrontations that endanger law enforcement officers and community members. And the principle that human life should be taken only as the last resort. So we're aware that de-escalation to many could look like appeasement. And, depending on the circumstances, it is appeasement in certain regards because we're trying to keep things from escalating into violence and until we're in a position to maybe do whatever action we need to take. So what I've been telling people is our desire to do enforcement may be here, but our capability at that time was here. So again, 40 protesters, we don't know what their true intentions are, don't know if they're armed, don't know what they're going to do. So, of course, we're going to talk with them and try to determine what their outcome is going to be. Now, they could lie to us, certainly, and mislead us, but we've looked across the country and we've seen how protests can escalate. We don't have to look too far to our south. In Skokie, one of those protests escalated to gunfire. So that is in the back of mind of our officers. And, we had obviously residents out there very upset, reasonably upset, understandably upset, but we have to balance all of that. And so we were waiting for mutual aid to come onto the scene. So what that looks like from a law enforcement perspective is will or desire to make arrests, and they were breaking the law, so clearly breaking the law, our ability to. And that was starting to come online as officers would be getting there. And if we got to the point where we were safe to make arrests and it made sense to be able to go and approach people and take them into custody, we would do that. We just have to be in that position. You can imagine, not being a police officer yourself, but you can imagine that the ratio of 5 to 1 is concerning to us. So if an officer who's got a firearm is descended upon by 5 people, that's not going to end well. They may very well get that firearm, and things could escalate quickly. And then we may put ourselves in a position where 5 on 1, the officer feels threatened because 5 on 1 could do some serious harm, and we end up shooting that person. And the narrative would, of course, be an unarmed person shot. So there's a lot that's going through the minds of the officers that are on the scene. Law enforcement is also charged with holding those who break the law accountable. I mean, that's what we do. So, there's no doubt that this group is breaking the law, but we need to be in a position to do it safely for all involved. And given the timeline of the specific incident, the event actually concluded before the necessary resources were on scene. So moving forward, we've certainly had a lot of discussions with our neighboring departments, and they understand that they too may be put in this position at some point. So we're working on ways that we can expedite the arrival of the necessary resources so we can bring this more in line and be able to take action safely quicker. So that's one of the things we're working on at this point, should there be a repeat or a potential repeat of an incident. Moving on to the chalking, over the past few weeks, the department's responded to a number of incidents in the Central Business District where an individual is using non-permanent chalk to write statements which are offensive to a great many members of our community. Officers responded to citizen complaints on July 5th and again on July 10th. And we spoke with community members on scene as well as the individual. During both incidents, community members engaged with the individual, but again, in line with principle number 10, the officers remained in the area to de-escalate, to make sure that violence didn't erupt. And again, I know that can be equated to appeasement. It's not. I mean, our job, our role, as frustrating or as distasteful as it may be sometimes, we have to be down that middle, and we certainly have to work within the context of the laws that are applicable, the Constitution, and so the officers did that, but we're also very concerned and we're very sensitive to our community, and we stand with our community. I mean, you all mean a great deal to us and to our officers. We have what we think is a really strong relationship with our community, and so, it is a challenge for us, but that is the role we play. And so the actions they took on that day, again, while it may be unsatisfying, unfortunately, at that time, those are the actions we were able to take. And so I think today, with this framework, that's why the City Council is going to entertain perhaps some additional avenues for us to pursue. Okay?
Thanks, Chief.
Okay.
Mayor?
We're going to have the presentation, and then we're going to dive in. Thanks.
So next, I just want to make sure we are all aligned in terms of public communication. So the city does a significant amount of communication where we are pushing information out, and we also welcome communication from the public. So this is just a snapshot of different ways, and specifically how the different modalities that we use to communicate after the incidents that the chief mentioned. So our city website, which is noted here, is updated every day. And so when we do have city statements, we will post it on the front page of the website as a news item. So hot topics, if you will, it's right on that landing page as soon as you go to the city's website. Individuals can email the city, and so if you go to the directory, you can find all the staff emails listed there. Probably the top 3 emails in most cases. If individuals are interested in communicating with our corporate authorities, the mayor and city council, that's the email address that's listed there. Now that does include me as the city manager, as the staff person, and so very often I will respond on behalf of the mayor and council to acknowledge receipts and provide information about if it's a staff response or a timing issue or a question. But know that the mayor and city council get those emails. I know they read them because we do certainly talk about them one-on-one as I'm communicating with elected officials. We have a general email, which is listed right there, cityhp@cityhpil.com. We have a number of staff members that are regularly monitoring that email. So for the public, if you have a question and you're like, oh, I don't really know, is that Public Works, is it police, is it fire, manager's office, you're welcome to email that general city address, and we will make sure that your question is answered in a timely fashion with the appropriate staff people. And then again, as indicated, the entire staff directory is listed there as well. Hopefully, everybody is signed up for the city's e-news. We have over 6,000 subscribers. We know we have 30,000 people in town, so hopefully more people will sign up for this, because what we have found is the e-news for really non-emergency matters, but for important matters, that's our #1 source of communication to make sure that people get timely information straight into your inbox. And so we provide important information as well as general information about programs, services, initiatives. There's a fun weekender about different things that are taking place in the community each week. So it's a worthwhile communication. We encourage you to sign up. And again, we welcome your feedback in terms of anything we may be missing or requesting further information in that regard. And then the city's social media pages. Facebook is probably the first source of social media, the #1 outlet that we use, and so we will post information on Facebook. If you are looking to contact the city, please use one of the other communication modalities. Sometimes people think we are generally surfing Facebook and will respond to questions that people ask on neighborhood pages. We request that people contact us through either email, is probably, or phone call, one of the formal ways to communicate with the city. But for example, after the protest, we did share the city statement on social media because we know people are on there, just to make sure that everyone had that information there, as well as the other modes of communication. And then very, very important, if there is an emergency at any time, dial 911. We all learned it in kindergarten, it still stays true today. So if there's an emergency, dial 911. We do contract with the Village of Glenview, so Glenview Public Safety Dispatch Center. So they provide fire and EMS services to Highland Park as well as to several other neighboring communities. There's great value in doing that. There's also requirements for consolidated dispatch. We have a dispatch center in the Highland Park Police Department, and there's another one in the Village of Glenview. But again, if you call 911, you are getting a telecommunicator that will be able to address your question, be able to dispatch the appropriate fire and police services immediately. And then the non-emergency dispatch number, so 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you can call that dispatch number that you see listed there. And again, you'll get a telecommunicator, but that's the non-emergency number there. So we asked Corporation Counsel to review all the local and state applicable laws that would be relevant for the incidents that we dealt with, specifically the protest and the chalking. And we want to thank, residents have reached out to us and saying, what about this law? Certainly we heard from the mayor and city council. And so upon review of our municipal code as well as state's law, this is really the most applicable laws that would be relevant as it pertains to the unlawful behavior that people witnessed and heard about. So as it pertains to local codes, generally, these may be more administrative in nature. So when you look at a local citation, the range may start at a $25 citation up to $500. When you look at state law, Class B, Class A misdemeanors, so there's different provisions under state law that, again, are available to us as it pertains to unlawful behavior. I'm going to leave this. We can certainly come back and address this if the council has questions, but just want to make sure that, that all these areas were reviewed. Okay, and now so for policy considerations. So when we take a look at our local municipal code, there are a number of different options that are available to us as a city to be able to advance. So the first one is establishing a local prohibition for protesting in front of a residence. Now, state law, again, already has a prohibition. You cannot protest, you cannot picket in front of a residence, okay? State law already provides for that. That is unlawful. But let's say something happens and the state decides not to prosecute that case. So there is value in having a local law. So it could be, if the state doesn't prosecute, then we'll issue a local citation, or it could be compounded. So that's one policy consideration that is available. Another thing that we have talked about, because the state law is very narrow as it pertains to in front of a residence. So the specific language is picketing before or about a residence or dwelling or any person, except when the residence or dwelling is used as a place of business. So for example, though, if people picket in front of a school, for example, technically that's not a residence, and yet that's in a residential area. So that could be very, very disruptive if that happens. So working with Corporation Counsel, we could take a look at a local law that just makes it a little bit more broad and addresses residents more loosely, if you will. So that example about picketing in front of a school could be applicable if it's disrupting the neighborhood. We not only have local citations for nuisance and some other aspects, but we could take a look at this picketing prohibition as a local law. Another aspect that could be considered is advancing a law to prohibit all protests from dusk until dawn. Talked to Councilmember Stone earlier today. The other thing that she had suggested as part of this consideration is maybe tie the time parameter to our nuisance regulations. And so that would be 8 p.m. to 7 a.m. when the following day is Monday through Friday, or 10 p.m. to 9 a.m. when the following day is Saturday, Sunday, or a holiday. That way it's very specific, it's a time as opposed to, is the sun out yet, or, is it dusk, is it dawn? So that's one consideration, that all protests would be prohibited anywhere during this time parameter. Increasing the fine for blocking a street or sidewalk is something else that could be considered. Again, the fines range currently between $25 and $500 pursuant to our local code. So we certainly could look at increasing fines as it pertains to the city's annual fee resolution. We had talked individually to council members. The mayor had suggested consideration to look at a prohibition for masks for any rallies or protests. So that's certainly an option that is available to us. Corporation Counsel could elaborate a little bit more, so there may be some considerations that should be had as it pertains to any religious exemptions. What do we do if someone says, I have COVID, I'm wearing a mask because I don't want to breathe on anybody, or I'm sick? And so certainly from a law enforcement or enforcement perspective, we don't want our officers to have to be able to figuring out exemptions as people are in the field and, telling us that they're sick or so forth. So simpler the better from our perspective, but that's certainly an option that's available to us. We often get asked if we require a permit for any types of protests or rallies or walks. And so our answer is this. If someone is planning a gathering, what we want to do is we want to talk to them to understand, what are you doing? Where is it going to be held? We want to provide some guidance. For example, individuals should not be prohibiting pedestrian or vehicular access. But if you're looking to actually close a street and have an event in the street, we have special event permit regulations, and so that's where we'll work with people as part of an event. We've had family walks, different things like that. We do ask for people to provide us notice what they're doing so we can be prepared as a city. We don't recommend as a staff, but certainly we can talk about it, that for protests and rallies, we actually issue a permit. We don't want to have to be in the position to be able, although we want that information, because we can't be subjective and say, we don't agree with what they're protesting, it would be difficult to have to issue a permit to someone if they meet all this criteria for something that doesn't align with the city's values. So that's just something for consideration as we take a look at gathering, picketing, protests of that nature. So currently, chalking is generally legal on public property because it's a non-permanent solution that people are using. And so we could treat chalking like graffiti. If someone uses spray paint, that is against the law. But if someone uses chalk and it's water soluble and it'll wash away, that is permissible. but we could treat chalking as graffiti and just make it prohibited throughout. Now that includes hopscotches, and that includes, we saw 4th of July messages and just different community spirit messages. So we don't recommend that, but certainly just want to make sure that that is an option that's available to us as a unit of government. Another consideration is to prohibit chalking in all business districts on the public rights-of-way. So in residential areas where, people are chalking in front of their homes, things like that, that would continue to be permissible. But in the business districts, we could pass a regulation that it be prohibited. But again, that would have to be prohibited for any kind of chalking. And so we know, for example, Highland Park High School for homecoming week likes to chalk. We know the Arts Center does a significant amount of chalking to support businesses and as part of different events that they're doing throughout the community. And that generally is really appreciated and, increases the community spirit that we have. But that is an option, certainly, that's available to the city. And so these are a number of different policy considerations. Certainly there may be others as well, but want to open it up at this time just for policy feedback as it pertains to these or anything else.
So if we could bifurcate it and start with the protest pieces, and I'd like to ask Corporation Counsel just sort of what would be most likely to be challenged and what would be less likely to be challenged. I am interested in all of these, frankly, but I'm just curious to know, prohibition to protest in front of a residence seems like an add-on to the state. The state seems super specific to one targeted residence. I like the idea that, when I first heard from everybody, I thought the state law prohibited all protests in residential areas. And that, to me, would be of interest. I see nothing to be gained from protesting at somebody's house, and I think it should be just banned. The protests, I like what Councilwoman Stone was saying about tying it to the nuisance law. I think that makes it easier to enforce and a much more clear, versus checking when is the sunset today. The fine for blocking a street or sidewalk, curious to know what those are currently and what you would recommend that they be raised to. And then obviously, the ACLU has an issue with prohibiting masks, and my research online showed sort of a mixed bag, frankly, in terms of, is it permitted to ban them? Is it not permitted? Should people be allowed to protest anonymously? Or, what happened in the aftermath of the Ku Klux Klan and why were those laws considered? So, and I appreciate what you're saying about the notice, because I don't want us to have to be like, yeah, we like you. No, we don't like you. You get a permit. You don't get a permit. Obviously, that's against the law. So curious to just sort of break down these first 5 and what else should we be thinking about? What are the unintended consequences of putting these into place? And then happy to hear from the rest of the council as well, but just feel like that's more information that we need to be considering.
Sure. And we could have a very, very, very long discussion on that, Mayor, because my answer to your inquiry comes back to what we can regulate under the Constitution, as you mentioned, as the manager mentioned, as the chief mentioned. Where we can't, I'll start with where we can't do, and what the courts are very clear on. We cannot regulate speech on the basis of content.
Right, but time, place, and manner.
But time, place, and manner we can.
Right.
A protest is a form of speech. I think that is understood in Highland Park. And so whatever the city decides to do, whether under its existing laws or under any new regulations that the council may adopt, our recommendation is avoid making decisions on the basis of the content of speech. It's a very, very, very high standard, and typically speaking, when a court is confronted with a question that it characterizes as content-based, the government loses the case. That's just, it's almost universally true. However, as you just mentioned, Mayor, courts uphold the right of government to implement reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. And that is a term of art. The idea is that a government can reasonably restrict where, when, or how someone engages in protected speech. But there are 3 standards the government must satisfy for its restriction to pass muster. First, and this parrots what I just mentioned, the restrictions have to be justified without reference to content. Second, the restrictions have to be narrowly tailored to satisfy and serve a significant government interest. And third, there have to be ample alternative channels for communication. We could go on each of those and spend a lot of time breaking down what that means. And I don't know that we have time to do that. But that's our North Star when it comes to these type of regulations. So with those in mind, certainly our office believes that a local prohibition that more or less parrots the state law would be sufficient. The state law on residential picketing, there was actually a challenge that went to the Supreme Court on a provision of that law that was now amended out by Springfield. It had to do with an exception to the law that the Supreme Court found unconstitutional. The existing residential picketing law in the state criminal code, as has existed for 44 years, has not, to our knowledge, been challenged. We believe something similar could be adopted by a locality. We also believe there is a way to enhance it or expand it to cover, as is shown on the slide, a residential district. We need to do a little more research if the council wants us to do that, because in a community like Highland Park, most of our city is residential, if you look geographically, and I'd want to be sure that we would be leaving open ample alternative avenues of communication. But as a general response, I think there is some running room with the first bullet on the slide.
So if you did do that, if you did say no protesting in residential district, you could literally carve out but for this public forum, essentially, right? Like, I'm thinking of Port Clinton.
Sure.
That would be construed potentially as a residential district because there are apartments in the Optima building. But you could say, okay, this is a carved out exception to the rule without having an open bag for the entire community.
Theoretically, yes, Mayor. I'm not prepared to endorse any particular
Okay.
proposal because of the nuance of that.
Okay.
I will say that when we get into downtown residences, that makes me a little more nervous because even
Sure.
though there are residences,
Their businesses.
it's not classified as a residential. There's all sorts of factors that we could cite.
But there's 95% of the community that certainly would be construed as residential.
Correct, and that may, I don't know sitting here today whether any community has tried that successfully, but we could certainly look into that.
Okay.
As a general proposition, can we do something in the vein of the state statute with perhaps a little enhancement? My answer is yes, I believe so, and we'd have to look into
And
that.
just to be fair, I want to open this to the rest of the council members on point one right now, just talking about the residential district question, what people's thoughts are.
I'll start.
Okay.
I'm generally comfortable with that. I would imagine there's a way to clearly carve out and identify an area that is appropriate to allow protests to occur in. I don't know exactly what a protest is and how that differs from a demonstration or a parade. We have parades through our downtown, obviously, and we don't want to lose that. Clearly, we don't want to have anything remotely like this. There's no need for a parade in residential areas, but I can recall in my youth, a long time ago, shortly after Lincoln was president, at the end of the school year on Flag Day, we had a parade around a couple of blocks that was not the downtown.
And during the pandemic, people had parades.
People
in
had
their
parades,
neighborhoods, so-
right. So I understand the caution to define anything specifically, but I would think you can define it maybe by specific zoning districts or something like that.
Potentially.
Because then it does give you some area for access that you have to keep open and make available under the standards that you've talked about. The other thing I want to address is the dusk to dawn issue.
So that's the next one. So first, if
Also-
we could let everyone have a turn on the
Absolutely.
residential, and then
Sure.
we'll, just to stay somewhat organized. Thanks.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mayor, are we able to ask a question?
Not in this meeting. At the 7:30 meeting, you're welcome to ask a question or make a statement. Thank you.
Yeah, with this one, I'm very much in favor of that. I mean, there's legal nuances, legal counsel worry about that, but directionally, I don't think that anybody living in Highland Park should feel vulnerable or exposed to protests in a residential area. And so I would be in favor of finding the right wording for that would be defensible.
Great, thanks.
So I'm somewhat inclined to agree with it, in the sense that one of the things that I liked very much in the case law that Corporation Counsel gave us was the finding in the Washington DC district, which found a valid interest in the fact that the White House should be graffiti-free, or
Beautification of the, yeah.
and beautification and stuff. And I guess that goes more to the chalking, but to me, it looks to our business districts in general. And so I'm not really, it's difficult because to Tony's point about the parades and whatnot in front of Port Clinton, it's very difficult without going into content to restrict. And yet I feel that it's almost like the speech should be in our business districts and away from our residential, versus the writing and the statements, which should be kept away from our residential.
Right, the beautification
And maybe-
portion
right.
versus the, yeah.
And so I think perhaps looking at it in a framework where we're delineating it along those lines might help out. So I would really want to see an expansion. I think it's very necessary that we have our own laws in addition to the states,
I agree.
so that our city, our law enforcement officials immediately have access and know exactly what it is. Because frankly, I think that any failure in front of the congressman's house or anywhere else in large measure stems from our own policies. I don't feel at all it's from what our law enforcement officers have been told to do and follow. And so I think we're all learning at this point. And one of the ways that we can enhance it is to take it into our own hands so we can give them better direction. And I mean, to that point, whereas I understand what was said about the de-escalation and whatnot, you know, we do have citations, we do have things, and I still want to have more of a discussion in terms of what happens moving forward.
Right.
But for right now, to
Yeah,
get back to your
thanks.
point,
Thank you.
I think that the prohibition in front of the residential needs to be ours and needs to be expanded from the state.
And to your point, the state law is specific to a targeted residence.
Right.
I see no reason for protests to just be generally in a residential neighborhood. People aren't looking for that kind of chaos outside of their house. It just doesn't make sense.
And
So-
yet, and I can't believe I'm going to argue on this side of things, the bottom line is when they marched in Skokie with a message that probably none of us wanted to hear, they had a permit, they did it in daylight hours, they marched through what was a business area, but it touched upon residential areas in terms of where it went, or it was close enough to it. So it's difficult to, you know, figure it out. So I just want to make sure that we define it a little bit better than the state has.
I agree. Councilmember Bruckman?
I would absolutely agree with everything that's been said. And to Tony's point, maybe that would be a law discussion, but maybe by zoning district, and maybe central business district would be the only place where that would be allowed, but that would be up to you. But absolutely, 100% I'm in favor of what has been discussed.
Kim?
Yeah, I agree. I don't have anything else to add to that.
Okay. Yumi?
Open said, thank you.
Thank you. Yumi?
I will say the same as Kim. I agree with what's been said. That additional layer of prohibition in residential areas and the carve-outs, I agree with what's been said. Thank you.
Thank you. The dusk to dawn piece.
Sure. Similar analysis, as I mentioned, and I recognize that they're perhaps modifying from dusk to using our hours that we define as a nuisance for a noise standard.
8 p.m. to 7 a.m. when the following day is Monday through Friday, and then 10 p.m. to 9 a.m. when the following day is Saturday, Sunday, holiday.
Or in the alternative, you could just have it be the same hours, 7 days a week. Who cares if it's the weekend or a holiday? You don't get a free ride until 10 o'clock to scream, you know? Okay, so that's the third alternative.
That would be a time restriction. I certainly overnight, whatever we define that as, I would think would be reasonable that we would not, a municipality could prohibit, early morning protests anywhere. Keep in mind that, as we mentioned, under state law already, one cannot protest in front of a residence no matter the hour. That is a 24-hour prohibition in state law. So what we're talking about here would be a prohibition in the dark hours.
In the middle of the
It's
central.
somewhere other than where it's already prohibited. Whether we have our own local prohibition, and I have the council's direction or not, probably there's a way to do that also. Part of our analysis will be, if the council directs us to move forward on this as well, understanding if there is an issue with having both of these. Because as I mentioned at the onset, we have to allow ample alternative channels for communication. The more we restrict what those are, the more we might be pushing it too far. I don't want to give anyone the sense that you have to pick between these. We're not prepared to do that yet. Communities are different. I don't know that an example that happens in a big city or a tiny town would be applicable to a community like Highland Park. But if I take that on an isolated basis, is there a way to do it? We believe there is. And with the council's direction, we could look at the nuances and the specifics of how to implement such an overnight restriction.
And my question to you is, A, do you agree with this? And B, timing, is that something, where do you net out?
I do agree with it. I'm not sure that the noise, and I like the idea of using specific hours. That takes a lot of guesswork out of it. But the problem is, in the certain parts of the year, it becomes dark out much earlier. And the cover of darkness is part of the intimidation issue that I think we're concerned about.
Good point.
And it isn't really necessary for other forms of speech to be in the dark. I can't really conceive of something that falls within a demonstration that needs to be at night. The fireworks display or the drone show in conjunction with the 4th of July is a nighttime event, but it's not a protest. I don't think that's a content issue. I'd like to see the hours perhaps start earlier throughout the year and end later in terms of the period that protests are not prohibited. So maybe not permitting it from 6 at night to 8 in the morning.
So I have a question for you. You just raised a great point. A protest versus a rally. We've done things involving candlelight as a rally, which are not protests. But how do you make that distinction?
I don't.
Okay, so there's.
Frank,
there's-
quite can't. Yeah, I think that's where we start to run some risks, and it gets to the content of the speech. The
Right.
fact that a rally that the city sponsors, for example, it could be on any issue. Doesn't matter whatever, political, social, civic, doesn't matter. We just have to be very, very careful with that.
And is National Night Out over by dusk?
Close.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I'll point out, and I'll play a little bit of the foil on this, just to respond to Councilmember Bloomberg. Although I know that work patterns have changed since the pandemic, suburban communities like Highland Park sometimes had been referred to as bedroom communities, places where people live and they go somewhere else to work. I know that is not today what it used to be, but if someone wants to protest and Highland Park residents are not here as much during the day as they are in the evening, does that change the equation of what's allowable or not? It's a question I don't have an answer to, but I think these are things that we should be thoughtful about. Certainly 6-7 years ago, I think we all would have thought, well, yeah, people aren't around at 4 o'clock. Having someone allowed to protest at 6 might be a necessity. Maybe. Again, I'm not endorsing either side of that. I think these are things that we have to
Right,
noodle if the
right,
council so directs.
Right.
So a question I have to ask, I understand the time, place, and manner are permissible restrictions, and content is not. But most of us have become aware in current history this term hate speech. And I think it's important to define what hate speech is as opposed to hateful speech. Hateful speech, as I understand it, is a content issue that is protected. Hate speech at some level becomes unprotected speech as incitement is unprotected, and
Can you talk about that?
things of that nature.
To some extent, yes, and I'll be the first to tell you I'm not a constitutional scholar. Where the line generally lies is not so much with hate speech or hateful speech, but true threats. it is a fact, and there was an allusion to the Skokie marches of 40 plus years ago. Hate speech is protected speech as a general proposition. Hate crimes are not protected, but a hate crime and I know the chief can speak to this, an aggravation of an underlying crime. One has the constitutional right to be a bigot. That's can't necessarily act on it, but they have the right to do that, and speech is closer to the former than the latter. There is a point at which speech becomes threatening, where speech becomes something that's closer to a true threat, and courts don't uphold the right of people to enunciate a true threat. Those are very, very fact specific. It's hard to write a law around that does not already exist. All that maybe gets to another point behind all of this, which is whatever we decide to do in Highland Park, it should be administered and enforced on a content neutral basis. So under that framework, we'd have to get to that true threat language, and allow a lot of speech that is uncomfortable. Courts are pretty resolute in that, and they are very careful to say, and I'll paraphrase, the fact that speech offends someone or offends a lot of people doesn't change its constitutionality.
Understood. There have been a lot of questions about has this or activities like this risen beyond speech to something called hate speech that is independently actionable or something that can be prohibited? And the answer is probably not.
I mean,
unless it rises to the level of an action.
It has to be true. I mean, I don't know how to define what is extreme enough, but it's got to be out there. That's where courts lie.
Okay, if we could come back to the protest dusk to dawn question, I'd thank you.
Yeah, I actually had the similar concerns that Councilman Bloomberg brought up, that, moving the time, or sticking to a strict time doesn't match what happens with daylight and nighttime during the year. So, and a question for Chief Jogman, I mean, intuitively, in the cover of darkness seems like a more difficult thing to protect against. But is that true in your police force work? Do you worry about things being more difficult to defend in the cover of darkness? Yes or no?
Yeah, I should.
Yeah. Okay. Absolutely. Yeah. So I would be concerned, right? If we're trying to have a safer community, then darkness is a threat. It can be a threat, and I think we need to address that. And putting an artificial time, and suddenly it's dark at 5 in the afternoon, then we're in a more dangerous situation. So I think we have to work with how the sun
But you
works.
support the macro, the not having protests in the dark, basically?
Correct.
Okay,
But,
thank you.
And then let's be
And then we need to figure out
realistic
how to.
about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then just a loose end on the previous one that I didn't get to say. I like having our local ordinance on the prohibition, because I like it gives us more agency
Right.
to take in charge of enforcement or even whatever procedural things. And I don't want to depend on the state to decide whether they're going to enforce it or prosecute it.
Great point, thank you.
Okay, so as much as I don't want to depend on the state, and I also want to have our own local ordinance, I did have a discussion with the state's attorney at Congressman Schneider's house, and he was very clear that the problem and the fear that's induced that takes the speech to the next level, it wasn't necessarily based on darkness. It was based on the middle of the night. And as much as, and so and that was the additional fear that I think took some hateful speech and made it even more fearful to people, because they're woken up in the middle of the night hearing this noise and coming out of their homes and seeing these people, and they're masked in addition to that. And so but on the other part, whether it's the candlelight vigil, whether it's events that we have in the evening, and because I really believe in neutrality, what he was talking about with me was not a dusk to dawn type of prohibition, but in fact the current curfews that are in place. So when we say on a Monday through Friday, or Friday and Saturday being different from Sunday through Thursday, I'm actually more inclined, even though I know it's dark at say 5 o'clock in December, it's that being woken up in the middle of the night that takes it for me to the level of being threatening and frightening and beyond speech. If you hear music or a parade and you're in a particular area, whether it's downtown Highland Park or Ravinia or something, at 9:30 at night, you're not frightened. Because you know something's going on, and hopefully it's a good something, but then that's us deciding what's a good something and a bad something with regard to sound and speech. And because of that, I'm more inclined, and instead of the dusk to dawn, to
To have
really
the
go with our
hours.
current curfew hours,
Okay.
so that we're also not carving it out in such a way that we're preventing speech that would be so restrictive that the other carve-outs we make might be deemed unconstitutional. I'd rather keep it broader on the time frame if people aren't going to be scared at 8:30 at night, even if it's more difficult because it's dark, than they would be at 3 a.m., which was the argument the state's attorney was making to me that day. And that's why what I had suggested was more of what our current curfew hours are in terms of the regulation. And that's what I would support.
Good feedback, thank you.
Can I just
Yep.
for reference, and Councilmember Stone has a question too.
Yeah, no,
But
it's gonna be
curfew hours are 12 a.m. and 6 a.m. Saturday and Sunday, 11 p.m. on Sunday through Thursday.
But don't we stop sound? Wasn't it 10 and
So there's the
11?
nuisance ordinance and there's the curfew.
Okay.
So the
You said
curfew
this
is
curfew, yeah.
get home, young child, you're not supposed to be driving around, and then
Right.
the
Okay.
other one is the
And the
nuisance.
nuisance is, what are the times on the nuisance?
8 p.m. to 7 a.m. when the following day is Monday through Friday, 10 p.m. to 9 a.m. Saturday, Sunday holiday.
Okay, I could go with nuisance if in fact we have a way of defining that, but if it's gonna involve curtailing what would be deemed speech, I think there's problems with it, so.
So nuisance already is in place. The question is, do we add another layer that talks about protests? And do you use sort of the structure of what we're currently using for nuisance for protests? Do you change the different time? It sounds to me like you're okay with some sort of overnight ban on protests.
Absolutely.
Which was kind of the macro question, and then we
Right.
need to kind of figure out the details of what that means and when it's prohibited. So I think we need to have that conversation later. But thank you.
Yeah.
Marissa?
I would go with what was discussed earlier, from dusk to dawn, and I would say 7 days a week should be about the same. Just based on what the chief just said, and just for darkness comes, whether it's 4 o'clock, 4 p.m. in the middle of winter, or it's 8 o'clock, 8 p.m. spring and summer. I feel comfortable with the dusk to dawn.
Great.
For sure.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Kim?
Thanks. I'm okay with dusk to dawn or with the hours of the nuisance. I think the curfew hours that's too late to me. If somebody is protesting outside somewhere at midnight or at 11:30 p.m., there's a lot of people asleep. I think it's more like quiet hours. And I think that's an unreasonable time for someone to be out protesting. And in terms of the hate speech question that the Corporation Council brought up, we have some language that we use in the mural ordinance to prohibit certain types of things from being put on murals, and I wonder if we can use something like that. I guess maybe this is for the chalking rather than.
I thought we were content neutral on the murals.
Yeah,
Yes, that's content.
We're content neutral, but there was something in there I thought about lewd images or something like that.
Or it may have been words
was
about a business.
advertisements.
It may have been
I
advertisement.
thought it was advertising.
Korean images.
Oh, prurient.
Korean's the other word that we read and no one tries to pronounce. We can look into that.
Why did you put?
Thank you. We can look into that. The language in the mural ordinance was intended to parrot what is very generically recognized as a possible means of regulation. Vulgarity, inappropriate on the basis perhaps of adult content, things like that. There's some room to regulate there. It's, I think, a little harder to do with verbal speech than a fixed work like a mural. But that said, Councilmember Stone, we can look into whether something like that can be enacted within the confines of the Constitution.
Yumi?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. My gut instinct is prohibit, the protest dusk to dawn. Mayor raised a good question about candlelight vigils. That would not be allowed either, as I understand what's been said by Corporation Council. And my question is, what other cities have adopted to dawn curfew? Yeah, so that's my question.
We'd have to research that. Councilmember Ross, I don't know off the top of my head if anyone has adopted a protest ban that
Based on
covers,
time.
based on time. Well, based on, and that, those hours specifically.
Right. And I think to your point, Annette, you know, after 10 o'clock, there aren't a lot of candlelight vigils, but I think there is a lot of troublemaking potentially. So I think that's the conversation that we'll need to have. It sounds like we do have consensus at least to look at this as something that we can put in place, and we'll have that conversation around the details. Thank you. Increased fine for blocking a street sidewalk. So where are we, and what else can we do?
I think the answer is yes, we can do this. We can define an appropriate fine for this. I think the key here, and this really, I think, more of an informational point for the council. This really is about blocking a street or sidewalk.
Right.
Sidewalks are meant to be walked upon, and well before the incidents of the last few weeks, and there's occasion to discuss this with staff over the years, someone can walk up and down a street, chanting a slogan as a general rule, holding a sign. They can't fix themselves and prohibit people from passing them. There has to be room for everyone to use the sidewalk. So it's important to note what that means and what it doesn't mean when we're talking about that in the context of a protest. That would be a caution. But assuming, or on the hypothetical, that a person or group blocks a street or sidewalk, yes, we can make that fine higher.
What is it now?
$25 to $500.
Okay.
That's for obstruction of a street. So there's a number of different fines for, depending on the violation, but generally it's $25 or $50 to $100 to $500.
And that's separate from disorderly conduct, right?
Correct.
Okay, and so would there potentially also be a disorderly conduct if they're blocking a street and a sidewalk? Okay, anything else that they might be?
Nuisance violation or any of those things.
Well, that's more noise. So those two, okay. I don't know if you guys want to spend time on that at the moment. I think we got bigger fish to fry, but we can come back.
I agree.
Okay,
But I think.
thank you for being comprehensive.
But I think kind of directionally what seems to be emerging is, obviously we want to protect free speech, but sort of put some parameters around how that happens that would be safe for our residents, right? So to be able to say, yeah, blocking the street or sidewalk or any of these other things we're really agreeing on is a way of allowing the protest, but without threatening, making people feel vulnerable, or just getting in the way of people just getting into about their daily business.
Right, and that is already illegal.
Yeah,
It
but
is
I would
currently
take
illegal.
it through that middle one, and again, I'll play the foil a little bit. Threatening people, that could be a problem. Blocking actually be a problem. Making people feel vulnerable, depends what we mean. The nuance matters. And I know that is an uncomfortable thing to hear,
Maybe
especially
that's why we need to define it better.
hard.
And
Hard to
part
do,
of that
but
goes, so for example, again, we have an example. They did not pour whatever that red liquid was
On the property. They
private
did it-
property.
They did it on the public
But they
sidewalk.
did it right on the public thoroughfare in front of the congressman's house. And everyone knows that red whatever it was supposed to represent blood, and blood on his hands. And does that cross the line of hate speech to a threatening feeling because you see this red stuff on the floor, on the
the
street,
sidewalk.
on the public?
It certainly was defacing public property.
Yes,
but the
it
question
was.
is that implying hate is the question.
And
that's being
that goes
asked.
to, not to content, but to the time, place, and manner. And if that manner implies blood and hate, just like from the river to the sea may not, in someone's regular mind, imply death to all people of a certain whatever, but to others it does.
Mayor, I would say for this one, unless there's an objection, this is almost an easy
Easy one,
fix.
right.
We
That's
could
why I'm like,
just
I'm
double
looking
it,
at
make
the
it
clock, and I'm like,
$1,000,
we
and
got
at
some
least
other
it's
stuff.
something.
I like that.
Yeah,
Everybody
good
seems to want to
Okay.
increase it to $1,000.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, that was
Over now.
easy.
okay.
Prohibiting masks.
Right, so To my knowledge, this is, as I think the council knows, it's becoming a topic of discussion, not just in Highland Park, but in many communities around the country, particularly since the protests that happened on so many college campuses since the spring of this year, 2024. I'm not aware of any 2024 court case that addresses the legality or constitutionality of a anti-mask at protests law. Mayor, you alluded to it, some of these laws are on the books in some jurisdictions and are very, very old. Many have been traced back to the days of the Ku Klux Klan. Right. My research loosely of some old case law is that it was a little bit split. There were times when courts said that you don't have a right to wear a mask and cover your face when you're out on the street protesting, and other times where courts said you absolutely have the right to anonymously protest. You alluded to the ACLU. There have been some affiliated with the ACLU who have suggested in some media reports that they believe that a mask ban would be unconstitutional. Again, I don't know that anyone has adjudicated that in this day and age. Certainly a mask ban, if applied without reference to content, is itself a content-free regulation. We would have to use that for all types of events. I think it was, I don't know if it was Los Angeles or New York State that's discussing exemptions for medical purposes or religious purposes.
Both of them.
So that might be, whether that's necessary or just a good idea.
And there's the enforcement question. Right?
There's an enforcement question. On this one, we could look into it. Again, someone in this country is going to be the test case for this, and I just don't know where it's going to fall yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
What?
So we just don't want to be the test. We don't mind doing it.
Well, assault weapons, we would do that.
That's right.
So,
Putting the constitutional issue aside, I'm very comfortable with the idea. I understand there are religious rights involved. But again, if you are going to engage in a protest, and what a protest is well defined, there are certain balances in favor of being safe and secure in our residences and our person, that allowing mass protests seem to me to impinge on. The need for anonymity in a protest generally only occurs when the protest is in some way threatening or undermining. Not universally, but enough that I think there could be a logical constitutional basis to prohibit that. And
so I'll just share with you when we were pursuing the drone legislation, that was the exact same question, was now you have eyes on who's gathering to protest. And we kind of had to do some finagling with the ACLU to say, it's a lot of people, we're not identifying individuals, we're looking for, so I don't know if you have any more insights from that conversation of last year.
Yeah, I don't know how that would play out. I really don't.
So when you're in public, people have a right to take pictures of you with your permission or not. My mother has her picture on file with the FBI from protesting the Vietnam War in front of the library. True story, in Highland Park. You're protesting in public. We have a right to know who you are, in my opinion, as part of our right to be secure in our effects and to keep track of what's going on with these potential kinds of activities. Maybe I'm wrong, but I would think that there's...
You support it?
I do.
Okay. Andres?
Yeah, I'm very ambivalent about this. The obvious one is, the points you made, yes. On the other hand, some of these medical and religious and other just fashion things, who's going to police, is that a fashion statement? Is that a hiding your identity statement because you want to do bad things? Or, let's see what your religious exemption is. And then if I could make something coming from my experience, growing up in a totalitarian government country for 12 years, I'm not suggesting we would do this, but I'm just saying, if you talk it neutrally, when people protested against the government that was totalitarian, people did mask because it was a form of, protecting their identity from prosecution from a totalitarian government that would throw you into jail without due process. So even though I'm not suggesting we're in that environment, things have precedent, and there's some totalitarian tendencies that are emerging in our political system here, and I would not want to be part of something that prohibits people from protecting themselves from many totalitarian tendencies in the general political environment, and us being a case study for that.
Annette?
Okay, it's rare, but I come out on the exact opposite side of that, because I do have faith that we, at least right now, are not a totalitarian government. And I feel there are a lot of people, as much as we were told initially, that people want to be arrested. They want this to be loud. They want this to be, the front headlines. I believe they're hiding behind masks because they don't want to be questioned about their activities. They want to engage in hate speech, and they don't want to have any consequences to bear for chanting things or taking people out of bed in the
accountability.
middle of the night.
Right.
I do think this is a completely different situation. And because of that, within the structures, I think that Tony laid out, which I agree with, whether it's religious or medical, because I wouldn't want to impinge. But I can tell you that if there were 40 protesters there, and if there were some women who were wrapped because that was a religious belief of theirs, but there were men who were masked and they didn't have a COVID concern or a cancer concern, and they were outside, there's a reason why they were masked. And I think it's because they do want to cover their identities and hide behind that speech and think they can get away with saying this without consequence. And because of that, I feel what just happened in this community literally needs to be unmasked. And with truly, I don't want to make light of it, but I think it's incredibly important that we help law enforcement do their jobs and we protect people. Because, for example, in the middle of the night when people came out of their homes, it was clear that the residents didn't have masks on, but the perpetrators did.
And at the beginning of all of this, heaven help us, they weren't wearing masks. And then when consequences started to accrue, then they started to
wearing
hide their
masks.
identities.
And I don't want to enable them. And so within the limits of the constitutionality of, again, someone's religious right or illness, I'm very much in favor of an anti-masking thing, even if we're brave enough to be the test case.
Not the first time. Bruce?
I would absolutely agree with what Councilmember Lidwar said and Blumberg. I think that we should prohibit masking, and these people should find out who they are and have the consequences. And I mean, it's out there. The people, some of the masks that fell off during the protest. There's, I know that some of the names have already been out there with Congressman Schneider's protest. So I think to make this easier on law enforcement, it should be prohibited, the masking, within reason and besides medical and religious.
Kim?
I don't think I want to have Highland Park be the test case for this one. I would rather wait and see if other communities take this on. I'd also want to consider making a distinction, if this is legally possible, between masks that are used for medical purposes or religious purposes and other sorts of masks. So if someone has like a ski mask on or something, that's a different situation than somebody with a small surgical mask over their nose and mouth because they've got some sort of health concern.
So I think with an exception for religious and medical purposes, bless you, Andres, need a mask? I'm just kidding. I think that would be taken into account. But again, we're very cognizant of people using medical masks who have no medical need and are just trying to hide their identity, so.
It's a hard distinction to make as to why somebody's wearing a mask at the moment.
Right.
You have to ask
Do you all have asthma or, yeah.
Right.
Yumi, where do you stand?
Yes. Mayor?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. One sidebar. I apologize for digressing, but could you, Mayor, take note that I'm still concerned for people having the right to hold a candlelight vigil, for example, like the awful case of July 2022.
You bet, absolutely.
I do want to, at some point, further discuss the impact for candlelight vigils.
Yes.
I agree with Andre on this. I am ambivalent too. I think that the right to protest is part of the founding principles of the country we live in. I'm concerned that very often, I think, small children participate along with their parents, and I would be concerned. I think they have a right not to have, be photographed, and so I'm ambivalent about this. I think it needs further discussion and or further research, and also I too, like council members don't want to be the test case for this issue.
Okay. I have 4 who want to pursue this and 3 who are ambivalent. So to me, that says let's continue to look at this and figure out what it would look like if we did move forward with that kind of ordinance. Thank you. Thanks. Notice prior to protest rallies or chalking, consider permit requirement. I kind of want to jump ahead to chalking, period, because it's getting so close to 7 o'clock. So treat chalking as graffiti, and then prohibit chalking in all business districts on public rights of way. Do you want to take this together? Why don't we take this together? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So, Tony, what are your thoughts?
This is much harder for me, especially in light of recent events, but we have a long, I would hesitate to call it a tradition, but a lot of activities involving children and public art that involve chalking on the public way in the downtown, in other areas. I don't support the idea. I don't support the ideas that have been chalked, obviously, recently. But unfortunately, I think for me, at that point, that's sort of the difficult price of living in a democracy, is that you're going to get bad messages as long as nobody is advocating immediate violence or harm. When somebody chalks on the ground, sooner or later it's going to rain. More now recently, but the consequence is if we prohibit it, we have to prohibit all of it. And I think that's hard for me.
So graffiti versus CBD, any differentiation for you?
Not really, because a lot of these activities occur in the central business district in conjunction with a lot of our city-sponsored activities and activities of the Arts Center.
And I think it's important to know, because some people were like, why didn't you just go clean it up? Why didn't you just call Public Works immediately when this stuff started to show up? And I think it's important, and tell me if I'm wrong, but we as the government, that would be construed as censorship and actionable, right? That we could not go out, much as I wanted to. I didn't, even in the middle of the night, I mean, it's just frustrating, but the government, and I found that out the hard way, because somebody wrote something mean out there, and I went out with a little water and was told not to do that again, so.
Now, we do regular cleaning in the downtown.
We do,
So as
but-
part of our regular cleaning, we will go through and sweep and clean and so
But
forth.
specific to nasty things, we can't just show up with water and brushes.
Yeah, that becomes,
I can't even thank the Shamash ladies who, I'm not thanking them right now.
for the city to do that, for the city to go and clean only when there's a message that someone decides is undesirable,
Right,
that becomes a content-based, and even if it's not a regulation, it's content-based enforcement.
right,
And that runs us into the same third rail.
okay. All right, so graffiti, CBD,
Yeah, as offensive and odious as what was chalked recently is, I share Council Member Bloomberg's, feeling and opinion that, the chalking is not the issue. It's the other issues that we're talking about surrounding this. And if we try to forbid chalking, which on itself is not the offense, it's kind of how it was used, then where do we stop? Somebody decides to use balloons in a creative way, or, masking tape and cardboard, because those are not defacing public property. So I think we would be chasing different media rather than tackling the real issue, which is the potential violence and all the other things that we're talking about. I think if we make these other moves that we seem to have agreement on, we make our city safer. And then even the issue on permits, I'm open to having some, continue to have the permit process that gives us some, whether control.
intelligence
or some
about what's-
intelligence or some
yeah.
preparation, so police, enforcement can be ready for whatever escalation may happen. I'd rather go down that path and look at it structurally as opposed to chasing down media that's used to do bad things.
Can I make an argument in favor of beautification? I mean, we were putting $6 million into the central business district and trying to bring in, new furniture and all these spiffy roads and cutouts and whatnot. The White House says, we love you, First Amendment, but don't mess up our beautiful front facade situation. Is that not compelling?
I don't know about the White House situation about what the chalk was used.
You
but the
can't chalk in front of the White
Yeah,
House.
no, I know, but the kind of chalk that was used, the chalk that we see here comes off pretty easily, so.
Same chalk. Same
Okay,
chalk.
so I don't see it as an issue. It can be cleaned out pretty easily, and,
Not by us, though.
right, I agree.
Okay.
But aside, and when we see the chalking that we like, which is our kids and the arts, and,
Right.
it actually beautifies, and it makes our downtown pretty, right? It might be for a temporary period of time. So I don't think that it makes our downtown ugly. In fact, I would focus on, why do we want to pull in something that kids find an innocent thing to do? I don't want to go down this path of saying, being the city that forbade chalking, so therefore our kids can't chalk.
Right, no drawing flowers in the central.
I just don't want to go down that path. But I think that the other things that we're doing are taking this situation very seriously, and we're putting the right parameters in place to manage the public safety and the sense of being in a hostile environment and being able to manage this in a better way.
Thank you. Annette?
Wait, I need to go back for one quick second to something about law enforcement and the masking, just for one quick sec. And it's simply that part of what I'd like to see come out of this discussion, I think we all want to see, is making law enforcement's job as easy as possible. And to me, the anti-masking helps law enforcement with perpetrators and with bad behavior, and to do their job more swiftly and more easily, and maybe even be less confrontational, because they don't have to whip out the thing, or if someone refuses to give their name, I think it moves it along. So part of that goes to my point about, I think an anti-masking regulation would help law enforcement. So that's one thing. To this point, however, I think, and just so everyone knows, Corporation Counsel provided us with several cases in various jurisdictions where chalking was either permitted or not permitted or limited in some way. And I found that to be very helpful.
And that memo is available to the public. If anybody
Yes.
wants to see it, it can be requested through the Freedom of Information.
And the White House example, which you, Nancy, bring forward, and I completely agree with, I think is really applicable, especially and times change. And I think we are at a time right now, we want to be the most welcoming community we can be. From an economic development perspective, we've been talking about what can we do for vibrancy, what can we do to make people want to come to downtown, to our business districts, to our areas. And the last 2 weekends, when this gentleman, or whomever he was chalking in our community, I have never fielded more phone calls of people who were almost hysterical, not hysterical the way they were in terms of being frightened in the night, but so upset that our town couldn't do anything. And I felt, the good news was I could say, like you, I want to go out there and just smush it or whatever, but we can't do that as a city. And so rather than getting into the whole issue of deciding what content do we like or what content do we not, and who has the right to make those decisions, instead of that, I think that within our business districts, I'd like to see a carve out for no chalking, because I feel that we want to be welcoming to people. There are plenty of areas in residential streets, and this goes to the opposite argument again of where protests are versus where people can do chalking. If kids want to have, a lemonade stand, if they want to have a hopscotch, that's still permitted in our residential areas. But in our main areas and the beautification we're trying to bring into our city, I think we just have to tailor it in a different way. And it saddens me to do that, but speech and vitriol have become so ugly that, and I don't want to see people upset at what they have to look at until we, in due time, and we do what's normal. If it's every 2 days, we hose down the streets, that's fine. I'm not asking someone to do otherwise. But I've never heard more people say, I don't want to even go and look at Port Clinton, or what can I do, or how do I smush it out without getting arrested, because they wanted to stop someone's freedom of speech. So instead of asking people to take things into their own hands or be miserable in their own town, I think that for the beautification of our town, we carve out that niche in the business districts that we do not permit chalking.
Thank you. Brissa?
So I would go with the opposite of what you said. I look at it as, in most cases, it's kids and businesses that are promoting their businesses on the sidewalks, and kids having fun and drawing pictures, and the art centers, their events. And in order to make Highland Park a warm and welcoming environment that it is, you need that, and you need that creativity and excitement that the kids and people, everyone has the opportunity to write whatever, unfortunately, what they want to write. But I would say in most cases it's innocent fun, and so I would not prohibit chalking.
Based on what one person.
Based on, yes.
Kim?
Yeah, I agree with what Melissa just said and with Tony and Andre. I'm concerned that we risk restricting free speech by prohibiting chalking, and that people will find a way to say what they want to say in another medium. I appreciate the work the Arts Center has done to foster conversations between people with different perspectives, and that is something that addresses the underlying issue. I don't think restricting people from speaking or from doing it in tone and shock is addressing the underlying issue.
Great, thank you. Yumi?
Thank you, Commissioner. I know that we are all aware of the challenges of these issues we're discussing, and I hope that this is the beginning of these conversations, not the end. But I don't see how we prohibit chalking. I believe that it is a slippery slope if we say no to chalking. What else are we? I mean, say no to. I think that people can, express themselves in other ways if we, prohibit chalking, T-shirts, whatever. There are other ways, and I agree with council members Bertha, Tony, Andre, Kim, and I too appreciate naturally what the Arts Center has done with their Draw Together event, and I think overall if the chalking has overall the use of chalking has been a community pulling together, not pulling apart effect.
Well said. Thank you. And I know Glencoe looked at this in 2020, was
Yeah.
it? And ended up deciding not to regulate in their central business
Right.
district.
And what did Evanston do? Was Evanston the one who did? I don't remember.
We've not found an Evanston ordinance that
Yeah, there
that
isn't.
relates to
Okay.
that. I
I
know
just
there's some
wanted to
talk about that, but we've not located
And
that.
I just want to be clear, I was just saying in the business districts. I wasn't at all saying like in front of schools and corners and people's homes. It's just in the business districts for beautification.
But there's not interest from the majority of the
Yeah.
council,
No,
so
no, I'm
that
just
won't
saying.
be pursued. Yes.
Well, and I also want to address the issue about beautification and vibrancy. Just for record, I don't see it as something that is detrimental. The chalking, right, not the content.
It's art. It's not.
It's art, and we actually want to be more of a city of the arts, and we want to encourage people to have artistic expression, whether children or adults that are bringing their own creative ideas in to celebrate whatever it is that the different chalking events have had, for the most part, right? Except for this awful exception.
Okay. All right, so we have our work cut out for us in terms of next steps and where people, for sure, the prohibitions as much as we can, and,
Mayor, the one that we didn't address, and it's not a staff recommendation to require a permit.
Right.
So I just want to make sure the council
I agree.
is in support of
right?
that.
'Cause-
So I understand that recommendation, if I may, and you explained it well, but my concern is what we do want to have is information. Is there a process that's specified somehow within the code that requires that anybody who engages in these activities go through a formal information process? to provide the city with notice so that we can protect them and we can protect residents, and so that they understand what the laws of Highland Park are, so that they might decide not to violate them. So I understand we don't want to have a permit, because then you're potentially permitting somebody who is expressing ideas that are an antithesis to ours as a community, but still you want to insist that people provide information other than just, we'd really like you to stop by City Hall.
So we can look at it and confer as a staff with legal. Again, the challenge is, I think, because we want to make sure that we are being consistent with everyone. And so when a neighborhood does, a progressive dinner, I mean, in a way, they're doing a parade around their neighborhood. And so do we really want to have something like that, even though they may be all walking on the sidewalk? So
I would think you would want to know about it in terms of
But
city
you do,
services.
Yeah.
I thought there were permit requirements for certain,
So if someone wants to, reserve public space, so if you want to have an event in Port Clinton where it is your event and you are using that public space, we require a permit. If you want to do, for example, like a 5K and you want to close the streets, absolutely. Now you're obstructing vehicular traffic, pedestrian traffic. We absolutely require a permit for that. And we have two types of permits, a minor and a major. So for something like that, we definitely require a permit. Often people will call us and they'll say, I want to have, I want to gather with friends in Port Clinton and just do like a dance, which happened, again, most recently. So we'll guide them through that process, but we'll say, if you don't want to reserve Port Clinton for your use and you understand people are going to be coming and going, you don't have to pay for a permit, you don't have to get insurance, you don't have to, but we want to know who you are because we want to notify police and fire and public works and everybody else. So that's, I guess, the notice that generally is a matter of courtesy,
it's
but
reserving public space. It's not the city saying you may have this
And
event.
that's saying.
reserving the space requires the permit, correct?
Got it.
Yeah, or
And
setting up a
that's-
table.
And that too is
if you-
content neutral. If somebody wanted to set up a table in Port Clinton that has a bunch of egregious information and they contact you and say, we'd like to have a permit to set up our table of nastiness, by content, you can't say no.
Right.
But you're saying you don't want to expand it to then have it also include protests, rallies, whatnot.
Correct, right. So for example, there's a family every year that does a walk down the Green Bay Trail. We don't charge them for a permit, and we just say, as long as, thank you for letting us know, because you're a large family walking down as part of this, memorial that they do. And we notify our staff, so if we get calls, we know what it is and we're able to communicate, but we don't require a notice and, anything like that.
Okay.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And I don't want to change or expand the kinds of events that would require a permit. What I want to know is if we can make it mandatory to have an informational session with the city before any gathering of more than 5 people, or maybe any gathering or activity on public property.
You want to get the information.
We can look at
I want the
it. We can look at
information.
it.
You don't
sure.
want us to be issuing permission, you want us to
Right.
just get the
The
information.
police department ought to have advance notice if something like that is going to occur to provide safety. Streets and sanitation may need to know about that. There are a lot of legitimate government interests in knowing in advance that something's going to happen in a particular location. But it should be more mandatory than just, oh, it's nice of you to call. and
Thanks for
let
letting
tell
us
you.
know.
Yeah.
Okay. Andres?
Well, actually, I was going that same path, right? I think that, because you said, Gita, that it's good to know. Thank you for letting us know. But it's not mandatory to let you know. It's just based on the goodwill of whoever thought about it. So that seems like an uneven thing. So we benefit from the people that initiate and tell us, oh, thanks, now the police department can know to kind of watch out, whatever. But how many other things are going on that we don't know, and the city doesn't have the benefit of having known ahead of time?
Yeah, no, I get it. I guess the concern is, let's take that family walking down Green Bay. If they didn't notify us and we get called about it, now I'm gonna send a police
there's an
officer and say, we
enforcement
never got
issue.
noticed, you gotta go issue them a citation, or.
You don't have to have
Yeah.
a penalty,
Yeah,
but there
Okay.
should be a concrete, specific system.
Expectation.
An expectation that they have to do that.
We can certainly look at it, we'll look at it, yep.
Now, having made the argument, I do have a worry about more bureaucracy. Because how many of these activities are there, right, that we don't even know that are lurking out there, that are just happening organically, and if we
School
start to say.
walkouts or whatever,
So,
yeah.
so I'm not making a strong argument, but I think it's worth looking into it, and I do worry about the
Well,
volume.
if it's more than 10 people, I mean, maybe we can look at some structure so that, you know, if
Above a
it's
certain
5
number.
people walking down the street, they don't have to notify us. But if it's more than 10 or whatever number you deem to be reasonable that you would want to know about, maybe that's what we do it.
Okay.
So,
I'm gonna ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody who came. You're welcome to stay for our meeting that starts at 7:30, in which time there will be an opportunity for public comment if people would like to do that. Thank you.
Okay, this did not charge at all. No, it went down.